So now let's talk about some of the conditional statement in a shell scripts. Here we will talk about the conditional statements like if, else and elif in the shell script. Basically conditional statements allows you to execute certain parts of the code based on the given condition. So there are like different requirements while writing a programs in any programming models where we need to run some of the portion of the code on the basis of some commands, right. So when we talk about the shell script, what is the syntax for it? So this is a generic syntax for the if else statement, where we put the if keyword, then put some condition followed by the semicolon, then this keyword, okay, then the statement on the basis of this condition, then this elif keyword, okay, then another some condition followed by this keyword, then another statement, and finally else keyword, some statement or the portion of the code, and end it with this keyword. So this is a generic syntax of the if else if conditions in the shell script. So now take an example of some basic examples of where we can use the if else statements. So very first example, let us talk about whether there is a file present in some particular directory or not. If I want to check, okay, so if that particular file is present in that particular directory, say yes, file exists. If the file is not exist, then just here print that okay, file does not exist. So basically there are many situations where we require such kinds of things. Here you can see that, okay, if keyword is there followed by this condition, f hyphen f means that check whether the file is exist or not, okay. So here it will check if the file is exist, it will set as like a binary true. So if this particular condition is true, right, then execute this block of code. Here in this particular that code is just we are printing this particular message. If this condition is false, if this condition is false, then execute this part of the code which starts with else, right. So this is a simple example of if and else, if and else. You are just checking one condition, existence of the file, okay. So this combination will give you the like binary output, true or false. If this condition is true, then execute this section of the code and exit, otherwise execute this section of the code. Just see the program. Here I write a script with name condition1.sh and put this particular code, okay, into this. When I try to run this particular statement, here you can see that initially there is no file with name file1 in this particular directory, there are only two files, right. So when I run this program or this script, then it says that file does not exist. It means that initially here there were no file with file one name, okay. So that's why actually in a very first case, okay, when I run this particular program, it went into this section and it gives the result. So now I create a file with file one name here with the help of touch command, okay. So now you can see, if you see the list of the contents in the file, so now this particular file is present. So now once again I run the same program, right. Now it responds that file exists. So it has given the response from this condition. So likewise here we see that, okay, with the help of such if else condition we can check whether there is a file present or not. So in real life scenarios there are like different scenarios, especially while working on Linux operating system or Linux powered operating system, there are many cases where one need to check whether that particular file is there or not, okay, and in such scenarios we can use the conditional statements like if else, right. Just take another example, check whether that one particular number is greater than or equal to some value, okay. So for that it's a very let us consider a very simple program, okay, where we have declared one variable with num some value, num variable with value 10 initially, okay. Then I am checking, okay, if with if keyword, and if this particular variable is greater than 5, this GT means greater than. If this condition is true, then execute this part of the section. And what is that section? Echo number is greater than 5. If now there is another keyword elif. Here once again we are trying to check the condition. So here as we had first checked whether this number is greater than 5, then we are once again checking that, and that is done with the elif keyword, okay. Check the condition. What is the condition? Check whether this particular number is equal to, exactly equal to 5. So with this parameter one can use it. So instead of this one can, like instead of this greater than GT word, okay, one can use these signs as well. Here I am just trying to show you the different ways of assigning or checking the things, okay. So here we can use this particular symbol to check exactly whether that particular number is equal to 5. If that condition is true, then execute this portion of the code, num is equal to 5. If both the conditions are false, then directly execute. If nothing, like whether if that code is not greater than 5, it is not equal to 5, then that particular number will be less than 5, then directly execute. If that particular condition is also not true, and if that everything is false, then just execute this portion of the code. So just take an example, right? Okay, the same program, okay, I have written into this particular check number.sh scripts, okay. Then if I initially if I put the number as a 10, okay, and when I execute this particular program, so what initially it will check whether this particular number 10 is greater than 5, yes, it means that it will execute this section of the program, okay, you can see that, okay, and it will print this and it will exit the code. So if that number we pass exactly same as a 5, the same program, we are just passing the number, then in this particular case it will first check whether that particular number 5 is greater than 5, no, right. So now if that is in this particular case that is false, now instead of executing this, okay, now it will try to check this condition, okay, that this condition. Now here in this particular condition, the first condition was false in our case, right. So now it will once again check whether this particular condition is true or false. In this particular case where num is equal to 5, this is true, then it will execute this portion of the code. You can see when I run this particular code, number 5 is equal to 5, this has been provided the output. So let us take another example where I assign the value of num as a 3. So now once again it will, when I run this particular program, it will check whether the first condition is true or false? Yes, it is false. So now just check one sec whether it is also false. Then we are stating that okay, now this is also false, directly execute. So now don't want to check the condition with the else statement. If both the conditions are false, then only execute this portion of the code. So you can see that it has checked sequentially and it has printed the last statement, num is less than 5. So in this particular way you can use the if else statements to check the numbers, to check the existence of the file, so and so, right. So once again, like we can make use of the earlier knowledge as well, like if there is a scenario where there is a program and from the user will pass some numbers, and on the basis of that number one want to identify whether that particular number falls in which category. Either there is, let's say, student and who has some marks, and on the basis of those marks, if the user provides, I want to check the grade of that particular student. So in that particular scenario, directly as we have done earlier, just ask some marks from the user with respect to that student, put those marks in the marks variable, okay, by using this particular read command, and now check these particular marks whether those are greater than or equal to. Here GE means greater than or equal to how much? 90. If this condition is true, okay, then execute this portion of the code. Say that okay, it is a grade A. Else, if the marks are greater than or equal to 80, then tell grade B. Otherwise, print that is a grade as a C. So sequentially it will try to execute the code, and whichever the condition met early, it will try to execute that. So just take the same example, okay, same code I have put it in the grade.sh scripts and I try to run it. So it will ask me, okay, to enter the marks, the very first command, okay. So now from the user, if I put the 95, okay, so this particular 95 word will be assigned to this marks, right, and it will now check this 95 is greater than or equal to 90, yes, it will print this, it is a grade A, right. Now take another example, okay, another scenario where once again I execute this particular program, and in this particular scenario I put or enter the 45. Then once again these marks will be this 45 number will be assigned to this marks variable, and it will check, okay, whether this 45 here is greater than or equal to 5, then it is false, no. So now just move to another condition, right, here. So here as well it will check this 45, is it greater than or equal to 80, here also it is false, right. Then move to next, okay, this next, and just move to next and just print this. So you can see that this particular output has been printed, right. When I try to put another value similarly as we have done, if once again I run that particular program and I just exactly put 80 numbers, okay. So in that particular case, once again it will try to go here, okay. First it will check whether this particular condition is true, it is false, right. If it is a false, okay, then move to next condition, check whether that is greater than or equal to we have stated. So here in this particular case 80 is exactly equal to 80, right. Then it should give the response like this. So you can see that the corresponding output has been printed. So likewise one can use these else, if, else, elif situations as per our requirement for checking the different conditions, and on the basis of that executing some portion of the codes codes as we require, right. Now, let us talk about some of the loops in the shell scripting. We quickly touch upon the basic loops, okay, with simple examples. Very first loop, basically loops allows you to execute block of code multiple times. Instead of writing the series of the code and one kind of same kind of operation you need to perform for the multiple times, then you can use the loops. So, as in case of the different other programming languages like C, Python, shell script also provides these loops like for loop, while loop. So, let us try to understand these loops with a very simple examples. So, this is a basic syntax, generic syntax of the for loops, where we provide this keyword, okay, for keyword. Then this value will be iterating through the list of values which will be provided here, okay, and then do some operation which has been mentioned here, and it is ended with this keyword. So, it start with this for keyword, ends with done variable, the done keyword, okay, and whatever the variable we pass here, okay, it will keep on iterating through the series of like numbers or the whatever the arguments we pass those, and it will try to pass, and as those many times it will try to keep iterating within the this particular section. So, for those many number of times. So, here what is expected output when at a very first iteration when I try to execute this particular script, okay. So, what is expected that first I should look for one value, then go here, okay, and then execute this set of code. So, number 1, okay, number 1, okay. Then now whether check whether it has been completed, no. So, now just take the another value, okay, then once again execute this particular command, okay, then number 2, and likewise till the moment it finished the list. So, once the list is finished, it will exit the code. So, in this particular way generally the for loop works in the shell script, okay. So, when I run the same program, okay, let us check the output. So, the same program I have written in the for loop .sh scripts, okay. If I run these particular scripts, then you can see that it has iterated over the numbers and it has printed the output, right. So, now let us talk about another kind of loop in a shell script, that is a while loop. So, in case of the while loop as well, there is a simple syntax for it. So, there is a keyword while, then there is a condition, okay, and if that particular condition is true, till the condition is true, do some operation, and when the condition is false, just get out of that particular loop. So, here you can see that, okay, there is a keyword here, then there is a condition, then there is another keyword do, and there is another keyword done, and whatever is there present between this do and done, that is the statements of codes which will be keep on iterating till the condition is true in case of while, right. So, just try to understand this concept with a very simple example for the same program. Here we have considered that one variable which is having a value of 1. Initially we assign the value of this variable as a 1, right. So, now I check, I write the while loop and I check whether the value of this particular variable is less than or equal to 5. So, in very first iteration it will have the value as a 1. So, now whether 1 is less than or equal to 5, the condition is true, right, 1 is less than 5. Here we print that particular number with this count value, right, and there we are once again updating this particular count variable where we are adding 1 once again. So here in this particular statement 1 plus 1 it will be 2. So now once it reaches to this statement, once again it will go here. Okay. So in the second iteration the value of count now will be 2, right. So now once again it will try to check whether value of count is like 2 is less than or equal to 5, yes, true. Once again go into this particular loop. So now once again print that count, initially it was 1, now count it will be 2, and once again it will update. So in this particular case the earlier value was 2, now once again I will add it to, it will update it as a 3. So it will keep on doing till this particular value count will be equal to 5. So when that particular last condition, okay, it will come as 5 is less than or equal to 5, once again it will be true and it will print the final value or last value as a 5. And now in the next iteration when the value of this particular count will be 6, okay. So in this particular case, so this value like this condition will become a false, okay, and as soon as this condition becomes false the execution will stop, right. So this is the same thing which we can see through the programmatic way, like while running this particular program. So the same program I had put into this while loop.sh scripts, okay, this same program, and then I try to run it. So you can observe that it has run as till the 5 as we have explained earlier. So in this particular way, while loops works in the shell scripts. So generally always remember that where while loop is used and where the for loop is used. So in case of as we do in other programming language, the same kind of concepts or same kind of things applies here, where if I know the count of the number of iterations beforehand, then in such conditions you can go for the for loop, but you don't know like how many iterations you may need for that particular condition to meet upon, or if you want to exit for doing those operations on the basis of some condition, in that particular case you can use the while loops. So there are different use cases, and on the basis of the use cases you can use the loop statements as per your requirement, okay. So now let us try to understand another important concept in the shell scripting called as the functions, okay. So quickly we will try to see with very simple example. Basically functions in a shell scripting helps to modularize the code or reuse that particular section of the code as we do in the other programming models like a C or Pythons. Let's see how one can define the functions and make use of those functions in a shell script. So just take a simple shell, okay, shell script where initially I declare the function. So I put the name of the function here, then within these curly braces, okay, I put some code inside it, okay. So this is initial part is function definition, right. So now once the function is defined, now I want to call that particular function, so make a use of that particular function, right. So when I call that particular function, then this particular section of the code will be executing. So function definition is one part and calling the function is another part. Always remember this fact, right. So just take an example here, just run this particular program. So I have written the same code in this function.sh, okay. So you can see this is the same code. Initially I declare this particular function, okay, then I call this particular function, and if I run this then I expect that okay, when as soon as this command like calling is finished, so it should access or run this part of the code. So you can see that this is a function, so this particular part has been accessed. So as I was mentioning, okay, so in your script you define the function, and if you don't call that particular function, then this particular like part will never get executed. So as I was mentioning, defining a function is one part, but when that particular function will be utilized, when you call that function. So here in the same script, if I don't call this function, though these lines of codes are present in my script, and though I run that particular script, but there will be nothing printed output because we have not called that particular function. So these are the like basic things from the function perspective one need to understand. Okay, and I can call this particular function multiple times within that particular script. Okay, that is also possible, and that is actually main use and main reason why people do write the functions. So if one particular task multiple times need to perform, so rather than writing that particular section of code multiple times in the shell script, I will write that in the function and I will keep on calling those functions. So this is a generic use of the function. So can we pass the values to the functions and take the output from it? Yes, absolutely. So just take another example of that, okay, where I am just writing a simple code, a simple code where I declare one function, okay, add, and I am adding two numbers which will be passed at the time of calling of that particular function. So two parameters I am expecting, okay, and I am returning the sum. So this is a simple addition function, okay. Now when I call this particular function, okay, name of the function, okay, while calling, as we have seen in earlier, if there is a function, just call that particular function by the name, then pass these two arguments, okay. So these two arguments will be assigned to these two, $1 and $2. As we have seen that there are like multiple uses of this particular function. Here they text the arguments, okay. So now when as soon as it will get executed, okay, it will have some status. So if I want to print the status of earlier whatever the command has been executed, okay, so for that particular case I can use the combination of these two characters like dollar and this sign. Basically if I use this combination which provides the exit status of the last executed command. Actually this is also very useful when you try to write an advanced scripts where you want to check whether whatever the previous command or previous thing which I have run, whether that has been successfully executed or not. Those aspects you can check with this. So in this particular case, whatever the result of the earlier command, okay, we are asking that just print that with this particular statement, okay. So programmatically when we try to run the same program, okay, on the like by using the scripts, okay, and when we run this particular scripts, then you can see this is the output. So we pass these 5 and 10 values to these parameters, okay, it adds those values here, and this sum variable, okay, we just, and this particular sum variable, like whatever the sum is there, so we have returned this particular sum. So now whatever the value has been returned, now that is the part, now that is with this particular function, and with this, so whatever the exit state of last executed command, we will be printing it with this. So likewise one can return the value from the function in this way, right. And then there is another interesting program with by which we can by writing the functions we can deal with. So very famous program like calculating the factorials of a number, okay. So just take an example, if I want to calculate the factorial of the number 5, right, how one can calculate? Generally what is mean by factorial? Just 5 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 2 multiplied by lastly 1. So whatever the value, okay, how much it will have? 120, right. So for this particular case, let's write the function, and very famous method, okay, for doing call the function within the function itself. Okay. So, this is a great example, okay, for just in that particular case just write a factorial, okay, for one function, and in that particular function use the conditional statements. Okay. So, whatever the argument or the number, you just check and keep on changing till the value is less than or equal to 1, and do what one need to do, just like check the previous numbers, okay, and multiply, keep on multiplying that with the like whatever the value we are passing. So, here you can see that here at the like very first stage we are calling this particular function, okay, with value 5, right. Now, once we pass this value as a 5, for it goes to for the $1, right. So, now it will keep on checking the whether this $1 is less than or equal to 1, okay. No, then correspondingly condition keep on going here. So, at very first stage, okay, it will be like 5, then in the next stage it will be 4, okay, in the next stage 3, 2 and 1 accordingly. So, keep on passing those values to this particular function itself, and likewise it will keep on multiplying, right. 5 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 4, and likewise it will print the result. So, if we try to run the same program, okay, I just put this into the bash script, okay, the same program, and if I try to run it, right, then if I am just passing like this the same, right, here we are passing, if I run the same program, then I get the result as a 120, right. So, this is a by this way one can use the functions to write like some operations in the shell script, okay, iterative things if you want to do. So, likewise you can do by using the functions. If the same portion of the code rather than multiple times writing, you can write it once and once again try to call the functions in order to get the required results, right. Now, let us try to remember what we have learned earlier, okay, and on the basis of that, okay, try to write an like real life use case, okay. Here we want to write some automation scripts where we checks the or monitors the disk space utilization, boot disk space utilization on my system, right. So, you just remember like as of now what we have learned from the very starting, okay. Initially we try to understand some of the basic concepts of the Linux, okay, the different things, theoretical aspects of it. Then practically we started learning some important commands, okay, and today as well, like in this particular session as well, we try to understand like writing the scripts, okay, declaring the variables and so things, okay. So, just to have this particular task to be done, like disk space monitoring, okay, script where I want to monitor the disk space, especially the let us say the boot disk space I want to monitor, right, and if that space exceeds more than some threshold value, my script should provide me some warning signals, right. So, you have seen that while you are working on you may have seen that while you are working on any operating system, either Windows or maybe like any Linux as well, you in between you keep on getting some like warning messages, signals. So, it means that in order to perform some operations or tasks, the system at the back end it keep on running many scripts, many programs, right. So, for that it is very essential to have the knowledge of the scripting as well as the commands, so that you can automate many multiple tasks on while working on the Linux powered system, okay. So, let us try to understand this program. So, we have understood the knowledge where how I can declare some variable. Here we have declared one variable and assigned that particular value. Then we have understood the concept of piping, okay, where I am running one command here, okay, and whatever the output of this, with the help of pipe we are passing the output of this to next command. So whatever the output of this is there through the pipe, we are passing it to AWK command. And in the previous sessions we have deeply tried to understood how actually the AWK command works upon. So now with that output AWK command works, okay. Now whatever the output of this command is there, then once again we are trying to pass it to the while loop. So this was one command, this was another command, and then this is a third command. So in the script, okay, we keep on running commands, passing the outputs of that command, and then like till the moment the desired thing we want, we can keep on doing that. So here what is happening in the very first stage, whatever the output of this command is passed to this, the output of this command is will be keep on passing to this, and we are running the while loop where we are continuously trying to monitor that particular partition and the value of that particular partition with the threshold value whatever we have put, right. So once again here the knowledge of assigning the value of some variable by running some commands within that. So you can see that we have assigned, this is one another variable within for like a while loop we have used, and we have whatever the output of these commands like echo output, once again we are passing the output of this command to this, okay, and whatever the output of this command to this, okay, and whatever the things has been at the end whatever the value of whole command is actually passed to this usage variable, right. Similarly we try to extract another value, that's the partition, okay, and in that particular case as well we try to pass the value of complete this particular command to this particular partition variable. And then lastly we check whether usage is greater than or equal to threshold. If that is true, then we are telling that okay, this space, this usage for this particular partition is whatever, like at that moment 90% or 95% or whatever it may be. So when I try to write the same run the same program, okay, how it looks like. So just for example, so as if I run the df command only standalone, okay, so it gives me this much information, right. Here in the last script you can see that we have used this output of this command only with this particular parameter, and we worked on these aspects and try to understand that okay, this particular SDA1 device 1 where let us say for example I have the disk space present and I will be trying to see the percentage utilization, right. So in this particular case you can see that okay, the boot space has the 98%, okay. So now if I try to put the whole program, this program, okay, into one script and try to run it, okay, this monitor.sh, okay, then it will internally run those all commands, whatever the commands has been shown here, right. So all those commands it will sequentially keep on running, and the final results as we expected it provides, like all these commands, this command sequentially then followed by this, then this, okay, it will keep on doing this running, then for this one it will keep on running these things, okay, and finally if that particular condition met, it will give the desired output. So it means that okay, and finally when we try to run it, it will keep me warning like okay, 98% utilization is there. Then after that we can take the actions whether I want to delete some space from that particular memory space or so and so. So generally what I mean to say as from the starting itself, okay, what is the main utilization and main use of the writing the scripts is to automate different tasks, and in the within a scripts I can pass series of the commands, and all those commands will work to give the desired output. And ultimate use of the Linux and its powerful utilities is when you try to use multiple tools, multiple commands in a synchronization or maybe in a proper manner to get the desired output, and that is the ultimate goal. Likewise, we have seen the very last program, right? So that is the main objective while working on the Linux powered system. Specifically, when we talk about high performance computing systems, which is main target of learning all the aspects of the this operating system sessions, where you should be able to write your own scripts, okay, which can submit run your desired out jobs on the systems, and you should be able to get the results from that particular scripts or from that particular program, right. So this is it about the scriptings, okay. So in this particular session we have seen from the start itself like what exactly the shell scripting means, then what are the basic cells structure, okay, how one can start writing the screen, how he can run that particular script, how one can write the script, how one can run the script on that particular system, and while writing the scripts how we can deal with the different variables, input output from the users. Then we try to understand some of the conditional statements, okay, with some real life use cases. Then in the loops we try to see about the for loops, while loops, then we touch upon some of the concepts of the functions, and finally we have seen we have utilized the knowledge which we have gained at this moment by using some of the very simple real life use case of the disk monitor. So this is it for this particular session. Just to summarize, okay, from the different sessions specifically with respect to Linux operating system, initially we tried to understand the basic concepts of operating system, and then we touch upon the Linux operating system in deep. We try to understand different components of its directory structure, then followed by the different commands which are usable in day-to-day life while dealing with the Linux powered system. Then finally we will try to utilize that particular knowledge to write your own scripts, okay. Now this particular knowledge should be utilized, okay, for writing scripts or doing automation of your jobs while you will be running your programs on the Linux powered systems like a high performance computing systems. So with that, I wish you all the best for the further journey of learning this very interesting course on the introduction to high performance computing. Thank you.